Magic the Gathering, a game with so many decisions to make and so many cards to choose from. But it is not about that aspect of the game that I'm going to talk about, that is the deck building piece. What I am going to talk about is why you suck at playing Magic the Gathering. There's tons of reasons why someone like Mr. Paulo over here is considered the best in the world, or at least one of, and you are not. So let's run through all the things that you should be doing and get better at Magic the Gathering together. This is why you suck at Magic the Gathering. The first most important thing to know before you play a game of Magic is understanding your deck's win condition, or win con as it's called. Sounds like a cleaning product, but it's not. Win condition, win con, you need to understand it. And I'll use this deck as an example, for instance. So there is a card called Winota, Joiner of Forces. This card is all about putting a bunch of non-humans on the board and then attacking, and then you summon a bunch of creatures onto the board and potentially just win that turn. And it's a 4-drop, so in a theoretical amazing game of Magic, you would have a bunch of non-human creatures that you cast early, and then you cast Winota, and then you attack and you win. That's generally how Winota decks play. But if you just picked up this deck at random, you might be throwing away your creatures haphazardly like you're just playing. You might decide to trade creatures, you might decide to be more aggressive. With this deck, for instance, your main goal would be to not be aggressive. Get damage in if you can, but don't be losing all of your non-human creatures. These are incredibly important. If you're losing all of these, then you're just playing a pretty mediocre creature low-to-the-ground deck, which is not super effective most of the time. So you need to understand what your win condition is every single time you play a deck. If you're taking a deck list you see online, don't just put it together and start jumping into the ranked list because you've seen that it's got a super high win percentage. The only reason these decks have high win percentages is that people know how to play them. So understand what your win condition is. Most important thing with your deck. While understanding your own deck and its capabilities and curves and win conditions are obviously important, you also need to know that for every other deck out there. I hate to break it to you, but Magic the Gathering is not just about putting together a super cool deck of your own. You need to better understand what you can expect to run into. And not just expect to run into them, but understand how to play against them or what cards are important to them. So if you're looking at a Sultai ramp deck, for instance, which as of the recording of this video is very popular at the moment, tons of Sultai type stuff, you'll know that they have things like Hydroid Krasis and Uro, and they have things like creature removal with things like Eliminate, they have Shark Typhoons, so you'll know what you can expect to run into, you'll know how much those spells cost to cast. You can keep an eye on what lands they're leaving untapped, you can see what their curve generally looks like. That is a very important part of playing Magic the Gathering. If you just play an opponent cold without having any idea of what to expect, you're going to be caught off guard constantly. And the odds are your opponent is going to know what you're trying to do and you aren't going to know what they're trying to do, which is a terrible place to be in with Magic the Gathering. So study the meta, either just play the game a lot yourself to discover what the meta actually is, or go on to various websites. This is MTG Goldfish, for instance, where you can just see what the meta decks actually are, familiarize yourself with what their mana curves look like, what kind of cards they like to play, how your deck might not necessarily be as good against them, what spells you need to be aware of, and then you can monitor the lands they're leaving untapped. You have a sense of what to expect. You're not going into the game blind. Using your own win con is obviously important, but understanding what your opponent's win con is and what cards they might be playing, incredibly important. So familiarize yourself with what other people are playing so you're not caught off guard with your pants around your ankles. Another thing with Magic is your starting hands. And when it comes to starting hands, there's a few things you should worry about. You need to worry about whether you're going first or whether you're going second, because if you're going first, this means that you're going to have to play the hand that you are dealt and you're not going to draw a card. The important difference in my mind is that if you're going first, mulliganing hurts more, so your starting hand being good enough is usually good enough if you're going first. However, if you're going second, since you do draw a card on your first turn, you do have an opportunity to be a little more liberal with mulligans. General rule of thumb with mulligans, If you mulligan once, that's probably fine. If you mulligan twice, not so hot. If you mulligan 3 times, you're pretty much dead in the water. So if your hand is good enough, if you think you're going to be able to play Magic at all, it is worth keeping the hand, especially if you're going second. If you're going first, the luck of the draw is a little bit more extreme, but do make sure that you understand what your deck's win con is, what mana curves are, which means how can I cast creatures or spells over time. If you have 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, and you have none of them in your starting hand, that means you have no spells to play. That is not a good hand to hold on to, more than likely. However, if you have a lot of 1 drops and 2 drops, but you have no lands, that is potentially not a hand you'd want to hold on to. So it's not just have enough lands and I can keep the hand. You also need to make sure that you have the curve that you want to actually play so you can do things on each turn. Every turn where you're not doing anything is a turn that your opponent is doing something and you are behind. So always keep that in mind when it comes to starting hands of Magic. Another incredibly important thing to understand is the stack. The stack in Magic the Gathering is the order of events that are going to take place when spells are cast or triggers are cast simultaneously. So the first thing that you cast is going first on the stack, and then the next thing that's cast, whether that's you or your opponent, goes on top of that, and then the next thing goes on top of that. And the order of the stack is just determined by the order of things. But understanding how that stack is going to resolve, it resolves from the top down. So the most recent thing to happen resolves first, which means reactions are stronger than initial actions, because your reaction will resolve before the initial action. So let's see that in play here. This is from a very recent Reddit post from Maniacal Mewtwo here, where their opponent is going to cast Peer into the Abyss. Peer into the Abyss is going to make them draw half of their deck and lose half of their life. So the card in and of itself, kind of fun, but it's being played with a combo. The combo card that it's playing with here is Underworld Dreams. This huge fan over here of things is the stack. This is going to be all the spell effects that are going to resolve, and what this is saying is they're going to take 1 damage 1 trillion times because they're about to die, but each one of those is its own instance on the stack. So you can see here Maniacal Mewtwo feels like they've essentially lost the game, right? They drew their entire hand, they're about to take a ton of damage, they're about to concede, but what? What is this? They see that there's glowing cards in their hand, they have stuff that they can cast. They can put something on top of the stack before they take all of that damage. And wouldn't that be great if you had a burn spell to just take them out? Well, lo and behold, they throw a lightning strike on top of the stack and kill their opponent before they take all of that damage. So understanding how you can interact with the stack is incredibly important, because you can take a loss and turn it into a win as long as you understand how the stack interacts. Reacting to something will always take priority over the initial action, so save those abilities to react to things as a stronger stance, or at least if you see your opponent has completely tapped mana, you can feel safe that there's not going to be much they can do to add on to the stack after that. But a reaction to something you're trying to do will always take priority over your initial action. And being able to take advantage of this is the difference between players that are just doing stuff versus players that understand how the stack works and how to use it to their advantage. And finally, I want to go over not just giving you the 101 of what the phases are, but giving you the reason why your usage of the phases are important. Magic the Gathering calls the, first main phase no different than the second main phase. It just says you have 2 main phases. That's fine. It is accurate, of course. The thing that you need to be thinking about as far as these 2 main phases are concerned is think of the first main phase as combat enhancement main phase, and think of the second main phase as setup for your next turn main phase. So if you're treating your initial main phase as the only main phase that you have, if you are the type of person that throws down all of your enchantments and creatures and spells before combat starts, whether or not those spells have any bearing on the combat itself, you are not playing Magic the Gathering correctly, or as well as you should. Because if you're giving your opponent more information than they need, this is a bad way to play. The best tip out of this section of the video that I can give you is always play cards at the latest possible moment that you can where they're going to be effective. Which means, do not just slam a creature that's not going to participate in combat in any way before combat begins. If you just attack with what you have and then play that creature after combat, you've created 2 decision points for your opponent. If they have a reaction spell in their hand, but you've already played your creature, they know that they can react accurately to whatever is going to happen, because you have no more mana, you have no more spells that you can cast. They know that if they have a creature removal spell or a board wipe, they can cast it comfortably at this point in time. If you just attacked with what you had, and then save that creature for the second main phase, your opponent now has to decide, if I have that board wipe spell in my hand, am I going to wipe the board now because I don't want to take whatever damage is presented to me, or do I want to wait until they potentially cast a creature after that and then board wipe? This is going to be the difference between getting in that damage and then potentially getting board wiped, or putting down another creature and then getting all of them wiped for no reason. So do not give your opponent more information than is required. Play that last creature at the latest possible time that you can, so that way your opponent has to react to what's happening now. This is the best way to take advantage of all of these phases. So again, initial main phase is your combat enhancement main phase. The second main phase is your setup for next turn main phase. The sooner you can get into this mindset, the higher your win percentage is going to go as far as your Magic the Gathering is concerned. So do that, or I will find you. And there you have it, folks. Some tips to try and help you not suck at Magic the Gathering. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to do all the YouTube stuff, I'll spare you the details. But if you would also like to see a part 2 where we get into even more advanced things, definitely let me know down below in the comments, and we'll break it down for you. I love each and every one of you guys. I'll catch you in the next video or a future stream. See you around.